Okay. We welcome everyone to LA Jews for Peace Zoom. And today we have Uri Talil on Zionism. First, some housekeeping. Please, everyone, mute yourself, and please hold the questions and comments till the Q&A. Zionism, we all know, is a topic that can raise emotions. We haven't been bombed in about 2 years or 2.5 years, but with Zionism, we have a little worry that we will be bombed this time. The procedure is, if we're bombed, turn your machine off, wait 5 minutes, and we'll come back on.
Why do you think we'll be bombed?
Excuse me?
Why will we be bombed? Why this topic?
Because Zionism raises emotions. Anyway.
Okay.
Jeff, you said turn off our machine, or do you mean just turn off Zoom?
No, go out of Zoom, wait 5 minutes, and come back in.
Okay, you said turn off your machine, like your computer.
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Okay.
Okay. Now, before we do a real introduction for Yossi, I just want to remind people of what's coming next. The third Monday in August, we have Alan Ben Meir talking on Saudi Arabia as a potential peacemaker, and that will be starting at 6 o'clock, an early start for an East Coast guest. The following month, we have Sherna Klein, who's a professor at Chapman, an expert on Jews in Italy, and she's going to be talking on how fascism developed in 20th Italy and goes in Israel today. And for that meeting, Yossi will host because I will be out of the country. October 16th, again, Yossi will host, and we had a request that we have a meeting where we all can talk to each other, and that will be October 16th. So we'll have an open discussion of topics of interest. Now, before I turn the screen over to introduce Uri, Yossi has a short announcement.
Okay, everybody can hear me? I assume that you all heard about the chair of the Progressive Caucus in the Congress, Pramila Jayapal, and she made a statement that Israel is a racist state, and then she was bombarded with a criticism, many of them for Democratic Party, especially for some of the Jewish Congress people. At least the good news that I look at the names and I didn't see anybody from, I can say, the Progressive Jewish Caucus were not on the list, but it was still enough attack that she retracted her statement, but she mentioned that the current government is racist. And so what I decided, I called her office in Washington, DC, and identified myself as Israeli American, who have been active for equal rights for Arabs in Israel. And I mentioned a different example of racism that exists for a long time in Israel, not just by Netanyahu government, and gave all kind of examples, the absentee law, the confiscations of land, the national law, and the person who I talked to, she had no clue about all this. So, well, you know, people.
It's okay.
Aides of Congress people, they're dealing with so many issues. This is not the first priority. What's happening to the Palestinian minority inside Israel, even the occupied territory. So I suggest to all of you, if you can call, but she appreciated very much the phone call. She was surprised. As soon as I said I'm from Israel, she was ready for attack. And on the contrary, I encouraged and I told her that maybe will be good idea if the progressive caucus of the Democratic Party will send a fax, how do you call it, fax?
Fact sheet.
No, to go and send a delegation right there and meet, I said, with a fellow progressive Jews and Arabs and learn from them about the racism in Israel right from the first hand, and not to learn this from the government official, because you're not going to learn anything from government official about this.
Fact-finding mission.
So anyway, I think she need encouragement, because there was a vicious attack against her, and she's still a fellow progressive congresswoman, and she need to hear for progressive in the United States, especially progressive Jews, about their agree with her with the original statement about, and try to give an example. What do you think racism in Israel, not just today, but in the past? Anyway, that's it, what I want to say.
I just want to say, Yossi, I supported her from the first time she ran for Congress. And I was just thinking, I mean, to do something more practical and send her a donation and say why I'm sending it. That's what I'm going to do, because she is progressive on so many issues that close to my heart. So I think that's the way I think I would like to answer those kind of attacks on it.
Right, but
What's the phone number, Yossi?
it's the Washington office. Maybe I should put it in the.
I will put it on the email that lists that
Okay.
links to the recording.
The Washington office is 202-225-3106, and the Seattle office.
No, we don't need that.
Okay.
Okay, let's
Okay.
move on.
In the chat, Yossi, thank you.
Uri Talil is our speaker today. We all know Uri, so it's hard to introduce him. He was born and raised in Haifa, educated in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He immigrated to the United States about 40 years ago to escape the fact of the occupation. And he's been fighting for justice in Israel, Palestine for these 40 years he's lived here. Most knowledgeable, he's the most knowledgeable guy of anyone I know about Israel, Palestine, politics, and the situation. Today, he will examine Zionism, the term itself, its myths, and its uses and misuses. So Uri, it's your floor.
I just
Thank you very much.
He made Aliyah to United States.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I did Aliyah. Yeah. So first of all, everybody, thank you very much for joining. This is usually a very boring subject for most people, especially my generation, because in my generation, when you told us that you wanted to talk Zionism, our interpretation was, you're going to preach us morality and tell us how bad we are compared to the previous generation. So we used to shut off, not even listen, because we assumed Zionism was an old thing that was good enough to establish the state of Israel, but once it was established, why are you bothering me? And I'll get a little bit later to the interesting shift that happened in 48 or 50 between one mission and to the other mission of Zionism. Another preamble that I always say, if anybody hears me have any kind of criticism of the Israeli government or the state of Israel, don't hear me exonerating anybody else. Especially don't hear it as if I'm making the other side, the Palestinians or the Arabs, off the hook. There's plenty of blame to go around. So I just want to make sure, because a lot of times people hear me when I criticize the Israeli government, they say, oh, how come you take that side? Now, the beginning is the first question that a lot of my friends ask me, why are you even bothering? Why do you bother? So the answer for me, when I was growing up, I always heard the version that we, the Israelis, the Israeli government, we want peace with the Arabs, never distinguishing the Palestinians from the Arabs. We want peace with them. However, they, the bad ones, they don't want peace with us. And in my mind, as a teenager growing up, it didn't make sense, because I said, we are the mighty Israelis, we can do anything in the world, but we cannot do peace? How come? So that forced me to go start reading. And the obvious reading, I started reading with the beginning. How is the state of Israel established? What's the base? What's not happening? And before too long, I discovered that it's not the way I heard it. It's not the way it was relayed to me. It was not the way the interpretation was. So I'm gonna, first of all, I'm gonna see if I can show you. I pulled like 3 or 4 interpretations from dictionaries of what is Zionism. And let me see if I can do that and share a screen and show that to you. Okay. So the Oxford Dictionary, the definition of Zionism is a movement for, in parentheses, for originally for the reestablishment, and now in parentheses, now the development and protection of the Jewish nation in what is now Israel. So basically, they're saying right away the definition moved originally and now. The Wikipedia definition: Zionism is a nationalist movement that emerged in the 19th century to espouse support for the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. A third one, the Merriam-Webster definition: an international movement originally for the establishment of a Jewish national or religious community in Palestine, and later for the support of modern Israel. Again, there's a switch. We'll talk to it later. This is from the Zionist lexicon by the Talmai brothers. Zionism is defined as the national Jewish movement in the new era that supports the return of the Jewish people to Zion. So these are 4 definitions, respectable, and right away you see there are slight differences. By the way, the person who named Zionism, I didn't know that. His name was Nathan Birnbaum, and he was a Jewish author and scholar who was a religious Jew. He became less religious, left religion, joined Zionism, and ultimately, in the last phase, he became ultra-Orthodox again. Yeah, it says in his life 3 main phases, representing progression in thinking, the Zionist phase, Jewish cultural autonomy phase, and then he was promoting the Yiddish language, and then 1914 till his death, he went back to become ultra-Orthodox. An interesting progress, but that's just, that was just now. The Zionist movement was influenced in the 19th century by a lot of very powerful things. It was the French Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, the Jewish reform, Judaism in Germany, that actually created the movement Chovevei Zion, those who favored Zion. That's a translation, and they basically influenced the first Aliyah in 1882. That was even before the first Congress in 1897. Here's a list of a few thinkers who actually were before Herzl or influenced his thinking. And in the 19th century, there was Moshe Hess, the book Rome and Jerusalem. There was Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer. There was Rabbi Yehuda ben Solomon Chayal Kalai, and there was Yehuda Lepinsky. Some of them you probably know because there are streets over their name in Israel. Now, Zionism by itself, right away from the beginning, started to be in the eyes of the beholder. In other words, even before the first Congress or right after the first Congress, 1897, all kinds of people started adding their version or their interpretation to what they thought Zionism should be or how they would like Zionism to be. So for instance, there was a spiritual Zionism. This is something that Ahad Ha'am, he talked basically on spiritual Zionism. In other words, he was talking about the solution of the problem of Judaism, not necessarily a problem for the Jewish people or nation. That was Ahad Ha'am, the spiritual. Then there was the actual practical Zionism. That Zionism basically said, let's not talk. Let's start setting facts on the ground. We're going to go and settle in Palestine. Then there was the political Zionism. This is basically what Herzl and Weizmann later on, they basically were dealing at the political level, trying to get charters or an agreement from the powers to be, the Ottoman Empire and then the British Empire, to actually allow that legally, to give some kind of a charter. Herzl even tried to reach the Turkish Sultan, and he tried to get even to the Kaiser, some attempts. There's also a very funny thing that I ran into again. It's called synthetic Zionism. I bet nobody heard it lately. Synthetic Zionism was something that Chaim Weizmann invented. He says, I like the practical, I like the fact that we can settle them, but I like the political as well. So I'm going to combine the two and call them the synthetic Zionism. I'm just showing you a few others. There's liberal Zionism, there was the socialist version of the Zionism, there's the general Zionism, which is Zionim HaKlalim, which in the 30s, when they split, when the Zionist Congress split, and then there was the revisionist Zionism, the Jabotinsky version. These people split in the 30s, so there became more than one version of movement. Now, there was the cultural Zionism, Tzionut HaTarbutit, that basically was people says, leave me alone, I'm engaged in the whatever the Jews do in the world and they're cultural. One thing that came out of it, which is a mutation, it's a religious Zionism. And then there was the evangelistic Zionism came a whole lot later. And even in the 70s, Tzionut Shonai, different Zionism. Shalom Achshav tried to do that. So, also, another thing I ran into, I didn't even remember. Max Nordau, right around the first war, he predicted that there's going to be a catastrophic Zionism. Unless the Jews realize and they move to Palestine, there's going to be a catastrophe. He died in 23, but apparently 15 or 20 years later, he turned out to be right. So this is just a short synopsis of kind of like talking about. Now, the last thing that I want to share with you is the American Zionism. The American Zionism was always talked about as one American Jew contributes another American Jew, so the money would be able to support a third American Jew to immigrate to Israel. That was the definition of American Zionism. Tongue-in-cheek. Now, the Zionism can be a whole year course, a seminar in the university, and you never run out of subject or details to talk about. For instance, one of my things that I took in the Hebrew University as a course by Professor Yehuda Bauer. He actually had a course talking about the Zionist movement between the two wars, between 1918 and 1939. And this was like reading a detective movie or a detective novel, because all the intrigues and all the factions between 1918 and 1939 in the Zionist movement in all the congresses was an amazing, fascinating course. So I'm choosing to skip a lot of that thing because we'll run out of time before too long. So I'm basically jumping all the way from 1897, from the beginning of the first Congress, and I'm getting to 1948, to 50 years later that Israel was established. And a couple of pointers I wanted to make that I think you heard me talking before, and it's a very important for understanding of what's happening now, especially. Most of you are aware that Israel doesn't have a written constitution. And that was not a mistake. That was by choice. Even though the 1947 United Nations resolution that declared the establishment of two states, a Jewish one, a Palestinian one of the clauses was that both of them are going to be democratic. Most people forget about it, but it's written. In 1949, Ben-Gurion went that route. There was an election for a constitutional assembly in Israel in 1949. And it was elected and it was seated. A constitutional assembly has one job only. You have to write a constitution, declare an election, disperse yourself, and go for a new election based on the new constitution, which it defines whatever you want to define in a new state. Jews don't do things that way. So the next day that they were sworn in, promptly, the Constitutional Assembly declared itself to be the Knesset number one, Israel Knesset number one. Now, there were two guys from the Begin party, both of them were actually schooled in America, who jumped and actually screamed in the middle of the whole thing, this is a putsch. One of them was Hillel Kook. You probably heard the name. In America, he called himself Peter Bergson. He was the guy in the 40s who actually fought mightily with the FDR to help do something about the Jews in the Holocaust, and he was somewhat successful. Hillel Kook was, by the way, the nephew of the first chief rabbi, Avraham Cohen Kook. Kook number one. There's a Kook number two, the son. Now, he stood up, he said, it's a putsch. He says, you have one job. You have to write a constitution. And what you're doing right now is a putsch. He resigned. Very few in the history of Israel resigned from the Knesset on protest, on concept, on ideas. As it happened, even though they knew that they were supposed to write a constitution, ultimately a year later, what is called the Harari Compromise, they deferred it into the future. They said, basically, we cannot write a constitution right now, even though there was at least 3 different versions that they were dealing with. And they basically decided not to decide. And I can give you some interpretations. First of all, the cynic says that Ben-Gurion was not interested in a constitution for his own personal reasons. Because first of all, he realized that he's going to be limited to two terms, essentially, and he was not interested. Ultimately, he did that for 15 years. The other version, which is probably the whole prevalent one, he chose to go with the religious party rather than the left. Even though he had 65 votes between Mapai 46 and Mapam 19, he had 65 votes who would go socialistic Zionism. He chose to go with the religious people. However, part of the deal with the religious people, they told him, this nonsense about equality between men and women is not acceptable to us. In our constitution, it doesn't say so. The woman should know her place. So he gave in. Israel never wrote a constitution. Now, as an addition to this thing, not only not only didn't they write a constitution, every nation, when they declare themselves a nation, one of the first thing is they declare their territory. They set the boundaries, the physical boundaries of the state. Israel didn't do it. You'd think, really? That's the basic, yeah. I have an interpretation, it's not only mine. They did not accept the 1948-49 armistice agreement. They felt that they were not strong enough in 48-49. There's going to be another round, and they're going to do improvement on that thing. Miktseh shipurim. They'll be able to actually improve on what they couldn't do in 48-49 because they were not strong enough, especially against the Jordanian Legion, which was the most organized army that they were fighting. And they were talking basically about annexing the West Bank and especially taking control over Jerusalem as a whole. By the way, the 48-49 borders, Abba Eban famously called them the Auschwitz borders. In other words, they were laying already the predicate to how come they're going to enlarge it. So when you talk about Israel and the Zionists and expansionist, there's plenty of proof for that. If you read correctly and you know where to look for, rather than the Israeli propaganda that obfuscate all of it. So it was pretty obvious that they were preparing for a second round. Now, in 1956, Israel went for a second round with, in the 1956, what we call Mivtza Kadesh, they call it the 1956 operation with England and France. That there were two basically colonial forces who lost the Middle East. They were on the way out, they were winning out. Israel joined with them, and for a brief few moments, Israel conquered the entire Sinai, and Ben-Gurion gleefully declared the establishment of the third kingdom of Israel. And within like 48 hours, he got two notices, one from Bulganin from Russia and the other one from Eisenhower in the United States. Bulganin told him, I got about 1 million volunteers from Russia who's willing to come to help Egypt. Eisenhower didn't say it aloud. Eisenhower didn't like Jews. And that little Jew who betrayed him in the middle of his election in 1956 didn't sit well with him. The end of the story is like he folded within 2 days and Israel was out of Sinai in 56 within 4 months. However, the dream stayed. And in 1967, Israel took an opportunity and basically did Plan B, which was basically what they wanted to do in 48, 49, they couldn't do it. And in 67, they were able to actually conquer the entire West Bank. And they actually, within few weeks of that thing, the Israeli Knesset declared East Jerusalem annexed into Israel. And they declared this, the Jerusalem as being the official capital of Israel, like we always wanted to have since King David. The fact that Israel about 67 says, yeah, this is a temporary conquer, but Jerusalem is not. So even with the official version of Israel that we're holding it as kind of like a bargaining chip to reach some kind of a peace or peace settlement with the Palestinians and the Arabs, Jerusalem is not negotiated, which pretty obviously tells you that that was an intent that was been in the making since at least 48, 49. Now, knowing some of the person involved in the 67, it makes perfect sense. Yigal Yadin was the chief operating of the Israeli army in 48. Yigal Alon was the head of the Palamach. Uzi Narkish, who was the conqueror of Jerusalem, was the platoon commander that failed to breach in 48 to save the old city of Jerusalem. So all of them had personal agenda to try to do the second time, to do it better, to actually improve on what they couldn't do in 48, 49. So this is kind of like getting into the nitty-gritty, but all the conversation that Israel tried to obfuscate that there was an intention, there was an intention. Okay, so now I'm going kind of a little bit back. After the state of Israel was established, supposedly you would retire the Zionist movement, because essentially the purpose was to establish a state for the Jews. It was established in 48. Now, I assume there's nobody here in the crowd who is still pro-abolitionist. That was a movement 160 years ago that actually supported getting rid of the slavery. Once slavery was done, there's no more pro-abolitionist in the United States, not that I heard of. However, Zionism was a different story. David Ben-Gurion said, why do we disband a very successful movement that built the country in 50 years? Let's switch the mission statements and we keep using it, especially there's money, as prestige, as jobs, and all the other things that every bureaucrat really covets. So they did something very interesting. The first Congress in Israel was in 1951, the 23rd Congress. So the definition of what they call the Basel program was the 1897 program of the Zionism, and it basically says Zionism aims at establishing for the Jewish people a publicly and legally assured home in Palestine. That was the Basel Declaration, and for 50 years, that was the mission statement of the Zionists. 1951, a lot of the Zionists says, okay, time to close shop. They're going to say, wait a second, not so fast. So they declared a whole slew of things, but the main thing said like this. It's called the Jerusalem Program, 1951. The task of Zionism is the consolidation of the state of Israel, comma, the ingathering of exiles in Eretz Israel, and the fostering of the unity of the Jewish people. All of a sudden, the Zionism got a completely different mission statement. Forget about the first one. We accomplished it, terrific. So now that we have a very good vehicle, we're going to change the mission statement. Makes sense, right? Why get rid with something that works? Let's repurpose it. So the protestation came right away because the American Jews, especially the Zionists amongst them, say, wait a second, we didn't sign up for that. We're not interested in moving to Israel, a God-forgotten place in the middle of nowhere. We are happy here. That's created a big tension, which still exists till these days, because a lot of Zionists in Israel believe that unless you immigrate and settle in Israel, you're not a good Zionist. Their interpretation. There's a whole slew of other subjects that they included in that Jerusalem 1951 declaration as the new task of the Zionist movement that basically included the rest of the world, because that was the World Zionist Congress in Jerusalem 1951. So that's kind of like a quick summary of a few of the pointers I want to point. Now, I'm going to actually share with you a few things about me personally, how come I got involved in this thing. So, as I told you in the beginning, the whole notion that we want peace, they don't want no peace, forced me to start reading. And then in 1961, Ben-Gurion fought the whole establishment on something which was called the Lavon Affair. The Lavon Affair came out from 1954. Israel did some kind of a sabotage plan. They wanted to sabotage Gamal Abdel Nasser. They just came to power in 1954. They wanted to create chaos to justify England and France and maybe United States interfering and deposing him. So they used a bunch of Jews, Zionist Jews, who were actually supposed to collect information to throw some bombs in libraries and in movie theaters and even at the American consulate. Ultimately, they got caught. Obviously, nobody was in charge. Nobody gave the order. Lavon was the Minister of Defense. Ghibli was the head of the military information, the military Rosh Aman, Agaf Modin, the information, and the Ben-Gurion at 55, when he came back to power, because that happened under Moshe Sharet, who was the prime minister for a while, and Lavon was his defense minister. When he came back to power, he did an investigating committee combined of two people. That's a guarantee for a stalemate, and it was, because one against one, there's no deciding factor. In 61, after he left power, he was out of power, almost out of power, he reinstigated the whole thing. And that's when I really started reading into the political scene in Israel. And one of the obvious things for me, I read Ha'olam Hazeh by Uri Avneri. Uri Avneri was a journalist who basically said that we need to actually see how can we work toward resolving this situation, peace, because we don't want to fight them. We don't really have a fight. And going back to, they were trying to have some coalition between the Palestinians and the Israelis, who actually were fighting the British Empire, try to find some kind of common denominators. So one of the things that impressed me as a teenager reading his newspapers, and he was counter to the government. In other words, he would publish a lot of things that the Israeli government always hushed because there was a censorship, military censorship, and to an extent, there's still a military censorship in Israel, the democratic country, military censorship. So one of his ideas that I loved a lot and not a lot of people talked about, he said, let's create something that he named the White Bureau, or the White Chief of Staff. The idea was basically, says, if the Israeli government or the prime minister goes to the chief of staff and asks him, I want to take Cairo, I want to take Damascus, they'll pull pre-arranged plans that they've had, what you call drawer plans. And right away, within 24 hours, they can tell you we can do this, this, and this, and this. He says, how come we do not have this kind of plans? How are we going to do peace with the Palestinians, with the rest of the neighbors of the Arab world? Supposedly, we say we want it. Why don't we prepare for that? Why don't we have all the brain power and the preparation? So I liked it. I thought it was a brilliant idea. Later on, I realized that there was a reason why there was nothing, because the Israeli governments were not interested in that. They had other interests. So later on, I realized that one of the main reasons why Israel was not having a peace treaty with the Palestinians, because they were not willing to pay the price and the price was clear and obvious from 48. There were three main demands of the Palestinians. First demand was there is going to be a recognition in a Palestine state based on the 1947 United Nations resolution, and it has to be recognized by the state of Israel. Non-negotiable. Number two, the state of Israel and the rest of the world have to recognize East Jerusalem as the capital of that state. Non-negotiable. The third demand, they demanded that the state of Israel would recognize the right of the return of the inhabitants of pre-48. Now, that is the most sensitive subject for most Israelis because they say it's a non-starter. They're not coming back. However, they talked about it, and in 2007 and 8, when Ehud Olmert and Tzipi Livni almost reached an agreement with Abu Mazen, there was an understanding that Israel is going to recognize the right as a general recognition. However, the implementation of that would be translated as basically the reunification of families, and Israel will accept somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 Palestinians every year as part of a family reunification, and in the general would actually deal with reparation to the Palestinian
Refugee.
Housing and whatever was left, and that would include whatever the Jews left in the Arab countries. Together, they'll negotiate reparation to all sides. Americans and the European and others will contribute to that, and that would basically settle also the personal demands. But these three non-negotiable things were known to the Israeli governments and the politicians from 1948. Up till now, they're refusing. As a matter of fact, 20 years ago, when Bibi got into, 15 years ago, in 2009, he decided basically to manage the conflict. In other words, don't bother me, I'm not interested. We're going to do that for the next 100 years, and we're going to manage the conflict. Manage the conflict means basically a few dozen Israeli Jews are going to be killed every year, and 10 or 20 or 30 times more Palestinians are going to be killed in return, and we'll manage a conflict. And he said basically something very basic. Israel loses about 300 to 400 people every year, car accidents. He says 30, 40, 50, 60 Israelis dying from that. That's a tolerable number. That's the approach. I don't see any changes. As a matter of fact, it looks a whole lot worse because a new element got into the equation. The new element is like the religious Zionism, which I'm gonna talk about. I'm gonna talk about it in a little bit, but before that, I wanna raise another thing that was always bothering me and kind of like bugged me. Israel decided to call itself Jewish and democratic. And I never heard a bigger oxymoron than that. I challenge all my American friends and I tell them, if somebody tells you the United States is, for instance, Catholic and democratic, or let's say Protestantic and democratic, or maybe Baptist and democratic, or maybe evangelistic and democratic, or maybe even atheist and democratic, would you accept that? Or would you laugh right out? Because obviously democracy cannot be defined by religion. This is the tenets, the basic thing. In the United States, there's a separation of church and state from the beginning. So some of my friends say, yeah, but Judaism is not only a religion, it's a nation. I said, terrific. If Judaism is a nationality, what do you do with the 20% Arabs in Israel? They're not part of the nation. How do you declare them in democracy? wink and a nod. We never intended them to be in democracy. They didn't run. We wanted them to run. That's kind of like the basic of the contention. And every time you have a conversation, you raise the issue, says, Jewish and democratic? In what world? How can you even swallow that? It's fabrication. It's an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. Try to have a conversation with one of the spokespeople of the Israeli government. Okay, I wanna mention another thing that I remembered. In 1959, Shmuel Tamir, who left Begin at the time, created a new party. It's called the המשטר החדש כוח שלישי, the new regime, the third power. And he wanted to find something in between because Mapai and Cherut and Begin, and there was nothing in between. He wanted to create a third power. He was able to convince Professor Yeshayahu Leibovich, who at the time was not involved in the Israeli politics. Very few people knew about him in the university, but he was not. And one of the things that he did when he was on the campaign trail, he said something that stuck with me. He says, in the state of Israel, there's only really 3 parties, distinct parties. People says, what do you mean? We have 20. They say, yes. The real distinct parties are like that. First of all, there's the Communist Party. 59, there was still the המפלגה הקומוניסטית ישראל, the Israeli Communist Party. They didn't split until 63 or 4. Then he said the second party is the ultra-Orthodox. This is the second party. And he says the third party is the biggest one. This is the Zionist Party. All the way from Meir Chazan and Yari, from Mapam, all the way to the right to Cherut and Menachem Begin. Says there's no difference between them. They're all Zionists. And this is the distinctions that Professor Leibovich says in 1959. He said essentially, there's no real distinction. All of them Zionists, all of them believe in the same tenets, which is basically Zionism is above all. Zionism meaning Jews, nobody else included. So this is really a very tough distinction for most people to swallow when they want to say Israel is a democracy. Maybe. When you start the definition of democracy, you discover how many deficiencies are in the state of Israel. Now, to add insult to injury, in 1975, after the 73 war, when Israel after the 67-242 United Nations resolution, Israel refused to negotiate or leave and all that. The United Nations basically passed a resolution, the General Assembly, that equated Zionism to racism. The father of the current president, Isaac Herzog, his name was Chaim Herzog, he was the ambassador to the United Nations. He gave a show to remember, but it passed with about 125 votes. And for about 18 years, it held. Zionism was recognized in the world as a racist movement. They were able to do something about it as soon as they started talking the Oslo talks in 93. The General Assembly reversed it because Israel say, hey, we want to talk, we want to be nice. Rabin is willing to negotiate. So this issue about Zionism being a racist program still exists, and Yossi just talked about it. Pamela Jaffel just said something about it, and 100 crazy Jews jump on her and says, how dare you? And yes, because when you expose it and you speak it loud, they'll attack you. Okay, now let me see. Oh, one thing I wanted to make sure that everybody understands. There's so many strands of Zionism because a lot of people in the last 120 years discovered that when you attach the word Zionism to your political strand or political persuasion or political brand, it becomes kosher. This is like you go into a supermarket and every item is either natural or organic. That gives you tough taken, gives you the UL improvement that this is kosher. So a lot of people discovered it. And through the years, almost every political program in Israel calls itself also Zionist. Here's a quick check. All the Israeli Jewish parties, when they ran to this, the last few times they ran for the Knesset, all of them declared themselves, we are Zionists, especially the left. You know, Meretz had to say, oh, we are Zionists, and Mapai, the labor said, we are Zionists, because they were attacked on the right as if they are not, because they have a different version of Zionism that doesn't fit on Meretz. But you have to remember, everybody attaches the word Zionism to their program, and I gave you a whole list of them. Now, two of them that I want to actually talk about. I want to talk about liberal Zionism and religious Zionism. Both of them, for me, are oxymorons. The same as Jewish and democratic is an oxymoron, liberal Zionism, and I'm going to get attacked by a lot of people, and the religious Zionism. So when you talk about liberal Zionism, the tenets of Zionism is basically for the Jews. Nobody else is included. So 20% of the citizens of Israel are not Jewish. Their Zionism, the liberal Zionism, doesn't include them, even though they want to pretend, yeah, we are for this and that, and we want democracy, we want to include them. Yes, nice talk. Reality is different. So when you do the search, what is liberalism means, basically you come down to the basic tenets of democracy. The tenets of democracy are basically about equality, one vote for one citizen, and things like that. Try to talk to liberal Zionism now. Now, lately in the last few years, I saw that Peter Beinart kind of like retracted, and a few of them went back because they realized that on face of it, they are defending the religious Zionists. Now, that's another aberration, and I want to talk about, spend a few more minutes before I open for questions. So, in the 20s, the Zionist movement was fighting a lot of other people who didn't agree. The ultra-Orthodox thought that that's going against God. There was the Bundists. There were other people who said, we're not Zionism, we are Jews, we are religion, we have the Bible. One of the breaks that they got in the 20s was Avraham Cohen Cook. He was the first Ashkenazi rabbi in the 20s in Israel. And he was the first religious Jew that had a standing that gave the Zionists an hechsher. He gave them, he says, yeah, they're okay. And he justified it in the eyes of the religious people by saying, this is the beginning of the Messiah. This is the beginning of the redemption. We need let them do the job, and then we're going to continue. So in other words, the idea of Chamoro shel Mashiach, that the secular Jews are going to do the job, and they're going to do the hard labor and the hard pulling. And we, as the tradition of the Judaism, the Messiah is going to come riding on a donkey. They'll be the donkey that bring the Messiah. There's a fabulous book by Safi Rachlevsky, which is called Chamoro shel Mashiach. I recommend to all of you read it in Hebrew English, an amazing book. he gave the first hechsher. Now, his son, Rabbi Yehuda Tzvi Kohen Cook, the number two cook, both of them cookies or cuckoos. He was the head of Shivat Merkaz Harav, and he had the whole followers. In the beginning of the state of Israel, from 48 to 67, the people who were insisted of being religious were kind of looked askance. The secular socialists looked down at them because they didn't get the messages. They're still believing in that stupidity that stopped us for 2,000 years. They got the power though from Ben Gurion. He gave them the budgets, and they started having their yeshivot. And in around 67, Cook number 2 told all his followers, first of all, you need to enter the Israeli army and take it over from inside. Because from 48 to 67, the Israeli army, and even before that, Haganah, Palmach, Hashomer, all of them, the power, the people who carry the gun and had the power, we need to have that. So we need to conquer it from inside so nobody will laugh at us and we'll have the power. And that's what they've been doing, by the way, in the last 56 years. And if you check the Israeli leadership in the Israeli army, you see a whole lot more of them wearing the kippot, the yarmulkes. And a lot of them are graduates of the various yeshivot, the descended of Yeshivot Merkaz Harav. So they made the plan to take over Israel, but their version, which they call it the religious Zionism, which is the biggest oxymoron there is, because the Zionist movement was established as a secular movement, fighting those religion attributes and religious decrees and on and on and on. Yet, because they're Zionists, they're kosher. And this is what they realized. And now, the second thing that came out of it was Gush Emunim. And he basically told them, God gave us the West Bank as he promised, go settle. The people who joined them was Shimon Peres and Yigal Allon and Galili. This is the Labor Party. They figured we're gonna get these people because our people ran out of the vigor. They don't want to conquer the country anymore. These people want to, so let's support them. So the first 10 years, the Labor Party was the people who actually encouraged these people to take over the West Bank. It's not Begin. Begin just continued. In 77, he came in, he said, oh, there's going to be 1,000 Alonei Moreh, not one. So this is really an aberration under the name of Zionism that the Orthodox, not the ultra-Orthodox, just the Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox still, they have different concerns. They want money, they want to leave us alone, we don't want to serve in the army, leave us women, we just want to educate them the way we did it in the diaspora 200 years ago. They don't need to know more than the Bible and the Torah and the Talmud, that's it. So this is kind of like the powers, and if you watch what's happening right now in Israel, you see the conflict. It's a head-on conflict right now. And they feel they're powerful enough because if you see Rotman and Ben Gvir and Smotrich, these are people, these are the descendants of this religious Zionism, and they are fighting. They are fighting for the power. They want to control. They want to take over all the organs of the secular state. I think I'm going to stop right here and open, Jeff. You control the questions and I'll try to answer and what if and why and the challenges to the best of my ability. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Uri. And we all know that down on the bottom of your screen where it says reactions, you can raise your hand like I just did by clicking on reactions and click on lower hand. And until other people come up, well, David Mandel came up and Dick came up. So Dick, I guess, was first. So Dick, take it away.
Uri, when did the analysis of Zionism being a settler colonial movement appear? You didn't talk about that, but when I
Correct.
read Mondo Weiss, that's all they talk about. When I read the stuff from Jewish Voice for Peace, they define Zionism not in terms of Jewish nationalism, but just as a movement to displace Palestinians. What's the date? What's the chronology there?
You're absolutely right. As I told you, this is a one-year seminar. I just try to
I understand.
Cheers. You're right about that thing, because a lot of that nationalistic thing came about what I call the Lebensraum. We need more. We want to settle our people all over. This is what's given from the river to the sea. We're going to settle. As a matter of fact, if you saw a couple of months ago, Smotrich was in France, I think, and behind him was the map of the Etzel, of the Irgun. The two sides of the Jordan River, also the east one, scared the Jordanians. So you're right, absolutely. I didn't deal with that. You want me to talk about it? That they basically realized that they became the settlers of Israel. They took away the mantle from the socialists. They became the new socialists, and they're conquering the country. And they're talking about, we are the Zionists, we're the real people. We're gonna save the state of Israel. So essentially, yes. And a lot of the criticism goes to that, and Israel gets the ricochets because nobody buys the story. So people say, hey, look at your people. You're basically displacing, in the name of Judaism, the name of democracy, the name of whatever, you're displacing. You don't give other people a chance, the non-Jews.
So when did that emerge? I mean, when I first got involved, I never even heard the term settler colonialism applied to Zionism. I mean, I think it's fairly accurate, but it's something new.
Not to me. I heard it. I read about the settler colonialism from the early 50s.
Okay.
But that was basically the Communist Party of Israel. That was their thing, and they were actually rubbing the face of Mapam in that, because Mapam had the conflict. The Mapam, remember, Al Mishmar had for Zionism, fraternity, Zionut, socialism, for Zionism, socialism, fraternity of the nations. In other words, they tried to square the circle. On one hand, Mapam had the issue of the being part of the International. Yet, they were fighting for Jewish labor in the 20s. How do you square the circle? The establishment, Istadrut Avdim Hayudim Beretz Israel, they established the General Union of the Jewish, Istadrut Avdim Hayudim is the Jewish.
העבריים, העובדים
העבריים, not the Jewish, the Hebrew, הסתדרות העובדים העבריים, the National Union of the Hebrew workers in Israel. The words were not welcome, and some of them says, well, they should create their own and we should cooperate. This is the people who were singing the International at the end before the Tikva, Mapam in the 20s and the 30s. So the Maki, the communist, and then Rakach was rubbing into their face and say, yeah, what kind of communist socialist are you? You're basically settlers. And they reminded them in 1948, 49, 50, a lot of the kibbutzim of Mapam very gladly took over the deserted or the departed villages of the Palestinians. So this is a point of contention that is being rubbed in their face continuously, and it's very hard for them to deal with it. So you're right. You're absolutely right that the settler colonialism came out in the 50s. I heard it for the first time in the 50s, but at the time, derisingly, they say, oh, this is the communists, don't listen to them.
I thought settler Zionism concept was pushed by that Argentinian Jewish professor at UCLA, whose name I disremember, who
Peterman. Peter.
Yeah. Could I remember 15, 16 years ago, he was really pushing that idea that settler colonialism is a better way to describe what goes on than anything else. Anyway, David Mandel, you're next.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Sorry I was a little late. I couldn't find the message with the link. It took me a while. But I think I got the gist of what Uri was saying. And I think, Uri, I think you did a really good job of explaining the chameleon-like nature of Zionism. You put like a dozen or more different adjectives in front of it. And I think it's even more than that. If you take the term liberal Zionism, I think that means very different things to different people, and have both historically and currently. And that's really one of three reasons why I think that using Zionism as a basis for understanding what's going on, certainly now, is not very useful, because it means so many things to different people that you often end up arguing about the definition of Zionism, what it means, as opposed to dealing with the current events on the ground, which are much more, important than analysis of, involving. I mean, apartheid has meaning. Settler colonialism has real meaning. Zionism is this huge chameleon. The second reason is, I think that, at its root, it's my understanding, Zionism, as a response to Jewish oppression, first in Europe and then potential oppression everywhere else, posited that Jews needed a nationalist response to that oppression, which meant some kind of a geographical homeland with some kind of control. And, that could include binational, but it could include lots of different things, but some kind of control. And that was basically achieved in 1948. So why, you explained why, some people said, well, Zionism is finished, we don't need to continue it. And Ben-Gurion said, not so fast. Well, I think, pretty much whether you like the Zionist idea or not, those people were right. What's the point of having a movement? And the fact is that today there really is no Zionist movement, independent Zionist movement. The various groups that call them Zionists are reflections or echoes of the different Jewish political parties in Israel. There's no, look at any organization that calls itself Zionist. It's a very, very thin ideological basis. I mean, the biggest Zionist organization in the United States now is the Reform movement, and they have no intention of sending their people to go live in Israel. And I came to realize this. I think in 1972 I was a delegate to the World Zionist Congress in Jerusalem, representing the Radical Zionist Alliance, which Dick Zalem-Barrison was also part of at the time. And
we learned a lot, though, at that time.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I learned by going there was, what I just said now, that Zionism is kind of an oxymoron. It's not really a movement that means anything. Aside from realizing that, I got arrested on the opening night demonstrating against the occupation with Siach and the Black Panthers at the time. That's, another whole long story that I won't go into. But I realized shortly after that, and stopped identifying as a Zionist. I kind of, out of the momentum of it, I ended up going and living there for 10 years shortly after that. But nevertheless, I realized Zionism was really not a thing. And the third thing that I think is really unfortunate is that the term Zionism today is really used as what I call a rhetorical shortcut by lots of different groups, both for and against. I mean, you pointed out in Israel, Mapam says, yeah, we're Zionists. What does that mean? Others on the far right say we're Zionists. So, what does it really mean? And of course, opposition to Zionism here kind of refers in sometimes kind of even distasteful and even offensive ways to Zionists, using it as a euphemism for who knows what, lots of different things, and sometimes distastefully. So I'll just finish up, sorry taking so long, by saying that I think the more accurate term for what's really going on as the ideological base, the majoritarian ideological basis in Israeli Jewish society today is Jewish supremacy. I think that is a more accurate and clearly defined term, and that it's the outcome of Zionism, certainly, but I think that's more, and in the United States, what's really a more accurate term for what's going on in the Jewish community anyway is Israelism.
Israelism.
Adopting, yeah, I mean, there's the film that I think you showed recently. I saw that a while back. I think that's a more accurate term of what's going on in the American Jewish community. When you have other, there's the Christian Zionists, and there's Biden saying he's a Zionist, and all sorts of other things. But those are, I think we all understand what's going on there. Anyway, sorry, that's my 2 cents worth. I apologize for going on so long, and eager to hear what others think.
Thank you. There's also the evangelistic Zionists. Don't forget them.
Right, that's what I just said. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You see, as I said, Zionism in the last, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years became a UL. It's like a kosher label. Whatever you attach to it is good. It's like organic or natural.
Or the opposite. Or the opposite.
Yeah, but hey, when you incorporate that name into your name, you say, I'm kosher. That's kind of the thing. So when people don't understand, and obviously it's been obfuscated, the definition has been obfuscated, it's been changed around, and it's been bettered around. So anybody can define himself as a Zionist and say, what does it mean? So they're doing it. They're getting away with it. You hear it all the time. That's kind of like, really? But hey.
A lot of anti-Semite called themselves Zionists and said, hey, I cannot be anti-Semite. I'm a Zionist. I support the Zionist.
And the mirror image of that is people call themselves anti-Zionist, which means lots of different things to different people as well.
As an opposition, yeah, it became as an opposition. And then, listen, in 2018, Bibi lift all the masks. The nation law basically took the rug from underneath everything. He says, Israel, we want Jews. Everybody else, second class. Stand in line. You Druze, yeah, we love you. Stand in line. So if you ever needed a proof, the 2018 national law actually provided it if you needed it.
And I want to emphasize what David said, that there are people, there are groups in the United States, certainly Palestinian activists and Mondoweiss and people like that who use Zionism as a curse word. Anyway, Mina, you're next.
Unmute.
Yeah, okay, so I want to take it to a personal notion. Uri and me are both Israelis who grew up in Israel, and we're of the same generation and maybe the same tribe. And I have to say that Uri is very different to all the people I know in Israel who, when we grew up, we swallowed the indoctrination or the education system's stories about our right on the, we're very righteous, we're Zionists because it's our land, and we don't even mention the fact that they're Arabs. That's pre-67, although there were always about maybe 20% of the population in Israel now, but let's say between 15 and 20%. So we never mentioned them. We never mentioned this, and we were taught that when there was, yes, we knew about the 1947 UN declaration of two states, and there was a war that followed. We won, the Arabs fled. So, it's their fault. And so nobody checked that. It was like, this is, and of course we were all people like me and Uri, and we are children of Holocaust or World War II survivors, and this is our right. So we did not question the indoctrination. So Uri is different because he was questioning from a very young age, and maybe because he came from a certain household, and where his father used to be for a while in the serving the British intelligence, and he was listening to different radio stations, so he knew not to swallow the propaganda or the history books. It took me years, maybe until 67, to understand that there might be a different story. And most of the country became euphoric with the miracle of winning the 6-day war in 6 days, annihilating all the Egyptian Air Force and the Syrians and Jordanians, and it was a big miracle. And there are very few people who did not succumb to this story. And I'm sure you heard about them. One of them was Professor Leibovich that Uri mentioned. And then there was later Ben-Gurion, who also said we should not be clinging to these territories. This is a bargaining point, and we should settle and give back all the territories. And there are very few others. So Uri's understanding about the propaganda and the the history or the stories told in our schools is very different to all the people I know in Israel. So if you want to elaborate on that, you can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I only now lately I started to realize that my upbringing actually directed me a little bit different than the upbringing that most of my generation. You see, my father was born in Baghdad, and he spoke Arabic as a mother tongue. And he came to Israel in 1922 as a young boy with his brother as a real Zionist. They came to Zion as a real Zionist. And he was an intelligence man all his life because of the knowledge, not only of the language. In 1937, there was the big Arab revolt, 36-39, and the Andrews, who was the governor of the northern part of Israel, was shot by 2 Palestinians in daylight. And the British realized they knew nothing about the Palestinian inner working. So they drafted my father. He lived for 1 year as an Arab Muslim in Nazareth, 1937. My father knew enough surahs in the Quran, and he spoke the various dialects.
So your father was the first founder.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, he was, yeah, in a sense. He didn't carry a gun, but he was basically providing information for the British who paid his salary, and he also provided at the same time to Haganah. And they knew what's happening. And so when I grew up, my father had a ritual every morning from 6 to 7 a.m. in the morning. He would listen to about 6, 7, 8, 10 different news channels. He would start the morning with listening to the BBC in English. He moved to the Cyprus broadcasting in English. Then he would move to the Beirut one in English. Then he would listen to Damascus in Arabic, Jordan in Arabic, Cairo in Arabic. Then he moved to the Israeli version in Arabic. And then at 7 o'clock, you would hear the Hebrew version. So as 8 to 10 years old, for me, it was kind of puzzling. I asked my father, I said, how come? Isn't it the news the same? So, when a kid asks you a very complicated question that you cannot answer simply, he said, yes, it's always the same, except everybody have a different interpretation for it. So that's really kind of like got me to start questioning whatever I was told in a sense of, really, is that the truth? And that's why I started digging. And when I started digging deep enough, I discovered that there was a version that the Israeli government was selling me and all my generation to justify what we did. But before too long, I discovered that, you see, in Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson was God until 1973. This was like whatever he says was the truth. I knew it was not, because I had friends who told me that when Israel was fighting with the Syrians about moving the water from the Kinneret, they would start the fights with the Syrians. They would actually tell the kibbutzim the night before, put the kids in the bomb shelters. There's going to be a war tomorrow. And they instigated. They sent somebody to actually plow the area that was supposed to be, what do you call it? Shetach mefuraz.
No man's land.
No man's land. And obviously the Syrians will shoot and the Israelis shoot back and they start a war, one-day war, kind of like at will.
Altercation.
Yeah, and they always said that they started and our forces did it. And basically it was basically trying to hurt the Syrians and to actually train the Israeli army. The Israeli army got trained that way. So I knew that. So as a teenager going to high school, you start to realize that the spokesman of the Israeli Defense Forces is not telling you the truth. That's tough. Most my generation discovered that, you know what, the first day of the 1973 war, they're sitting on the line of the Suez Canal. The Egyptians are flooding all their strongholds. The Israeli Defense Forces spokesman says that the Israeli army pushed them to the other side. And they're listening to the transistor. We are being bombed, we are being killed, we are evacuating, and yet we pushed them to the other side. All of a sudden, they discovered that the mighty spokesman for the Israeli Defense Forces doesn't tell the truth. That was a major break for my generation who fought in the 73. So for whatever it's worth, you know, I basically was an icon class because I always asked the questions. And when I came to Jerusalem as a student, I obviously found a bunch of people who challenged the Israeli version of Zionism. I happen to be friends, personal friends, with Matzpen, a lot of members of Matzpen who were Marxist. I was not Marxist. I was always accused by them that I was a petite bourgeoisie. And I told them, bourgeoisie I accept, but I'm not petite, I'm a big one. I believe in the free enterprise. But aside from that, I told them on civil liberties and protection of the Arab citizen of Israel, and basically the bullshit of the Zionism, I'm with you. And as a matter of fact, a lot of these people were Marxists who were trained with the communist, with the Marxist dialect, what do you call it? Not dialect. Trained with the
Dialectic.
the Marxist
Jargon. I think you mean jargon, right?
dialectica,
Yeah,
Yeah.
dialectics.
The dialectic?
the dialectic, yeah, the Marxist dialectics. In other words, you take both sides and you find it anyway. So this is a way when you do arguments. So I learned from them a lot because all of them had the history, and that's answer to you, Dick. That's when I heard about the colonialist pan of the Israeli Zionism. I never heard anybody use the term before that. Then I'm talking, and I'm hearing these people say, oh yeah, that's a colonialistic movement. Think about it. It was formed in the 19th century. The British, who were the biggest colonialists, fostered it. The Balfour Declaration came from them. They basically ruled the mandate, and even though they did the white books here and there and all that shit, essentially the British gave you the whole country. So colonialism, who is more colonialistic than the Brits? Now, on top of it, in 56, when they left, you joined them. You created a war against Egypt to support dying colonialistic powers, the French and the Brits who were out. You, the Israelis, who wanted to collaborate with the Arabs against the colonialists in the 40s, all of a sudden you're going to war? So you get the
Yeah,
gist
you should
of
see
I'm-
what Moshe Sharet wrote about them, you know,
Yeah,
Peres
yeah.
and all this. That's a different story. It's not like all of
Because
Israeli
Ben
was
Gurion,
involved.
Ben Gurion
Yeah.
didn't like competition.
Okay, Yossi, you're next.
Okay, thank you, Uri. I wanted to add something that I think was not discussed so much. Going back to the statement by Herzl, what he said, people without land to land without people.
Israel Zangvil is basically attributed to.
Yeah. So, however, the Zionist leaders in Palestine, they knew that this is not true. Why is it not true? Because one of the leaders, it's called Yosef Weitz. How do I know about Yosef Weitz? From a movie called The Blue Box. I don't know if some people saw the movie. Very important movie to watch because it's go to the core of the Zionist ideology. Yosef Weitz was one of the mainstream Zionist leaders then in Palestine. And he told Ben Gurion very clear, and it's well documented. He said, in order to build a Jewish state, there is no other alternative but to remove the native people, the Palestinians, from this land. Otherwise, there will not be a Jewish state. For simple mathematics, Herzl maybe was very poor in mathematics, but in 1947, when there was a partition plan, 2/3 of the people who live in Palestine were Palestinian Arabs and only 1/3 of Jews. In spite of all the immigration and everything, the Zionist movement arranged immigration of Jews not to join the native people, but to replace them. But in order to build a Jewish state, they had no other alternative but to displace the Palestinians. And this also documented in a book of Ilan Pepe, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, where they had a plan, organized plan that called Plan D. And I think this is the main core of the argument that I have with American Jews here. I said it was impossible. It was impossible to build a majority Jewish state without displacing of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians out of their land. And this is the main core ideology of the Zionist movement in Palestine. Whatever they say in the United States, when you talk to a liberal Zionist, liberal Jews in the United States, 99% of them are absolutely not aware about this basic fact that it was impossible to build a Jewish state. I had a discussion with a Jewish woman in my retiree class, and she wanted to hear from me more and more and more. And I had a conversation, very lengthy conversation about this. And finally she told me, Yossi, I got it. I really got it. What you did for me now, you undid what I heard for the last 50, 60 years. And now with few hours conversation with you, I got it. I got it that something really fundamental wrong with the history of Israel. And I think this is the part that they are so afraid to bring up back these discussions about what was the goal of the Zionist movement in Palestine. I learned this from stories of my father, not same as Uri's father, but he came to Palestine in 1924 from Ukraine, but in few years, he understood what the hell is going on. And this is why he left his kibbutz, because the kibbutz was based on socialism, but for Jews only. If a Palestinian wanted to join, this was a no-no. And this came all the way when I was a young man after the army, and my aunt was in the same kibbutz, and Harod, told me, Yossi, you're a socialist, you believe in equality, come to join the kibbutz. And I told her sarcastically, well, you know what, can I bring my Arab girlfriend with me? And she got furious. And I said, why are you getting furious? Socialism is for everybody, right? And she said, not in Israel. For Israel, the kibbutzim is only for Jews only. And she was a socialist Zionist. This is what she told me because she had no other answer.
No.
She,
Ashkenazi Jewish, Yossi.
Okay.
Ashkenazi Jewish. Yeah. It's also, it's part of the problem, yes.
right. But I'm saying.
יוסי, לציונות, סוציאליזם ואחוות עמים.
Okay, yeah. But she was not from Mapam. She was Achdut Avoda or Mapam.
Even worse.
All this together.
Yeah, even worse,
Okay.
yes.
I just wanted to mention this because anytime I have a decent conversation with American Jews about this, I keep raising it and I ask very difficult question. You have to understand, of course, certain things cannot be undone. Like you cannot reverse United States, but you have to know what they did to Native American here. Ethnic cleansing in United States. And this is important. Now there is just in the last word, there is a young woman in Israel, her name Michal Weitz. She's not a granddaughter of this Yosef Weitz. She's the, how do you know, I don't know how to define.
Great-granddaughter.
Great-granddaughter, right. And she did the research and she belonged like kind of a new generation of young Israeli Jews who slowly come to term with actually what happened in 1948. And she's one of those. And she made this powerful movie called The Blue Box. It's unfortunately, I try to find it. It's almost impossible to see it here in the United States. I saw it during the Jewish Film Festival.
I'll get it for you.
But if somebody can get me, because this is an amazing educational movie for American Jews or for American in general.
Nina will get you the link and we'll send it to Jeff also. It's a
this is very important because this is how she revealed about, because she said she learned from the history of a great-grandfather that he was, the nicknames that he had is the father of the transfer, or the father, if you want to say, ethnic cleansing. And he was pushing Ben-Gurion to go to this direction because he said there is no any other choice. You want a Jewish state, this is what you need to do. And this is the core ideology of the Zionist movement. When I was a young man, I never defined myself in Zionist because of my father, thanks to my father who told me so many stories about the injustice. And as a young child, he brought me to an Arab town called El-Fachem to show me this is how the people, I know what's going to teach you in school, but I want to show you the Arabs in a real life, in real time, because you're going to hear a completely different story in school. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. By the way, there's a famous line by Trumpeldor. He is actually rumored to have said that wherever my plow, or wherever the plow is going to plow, that's going to be the line of the new Jewish state. And he said it like before 1920. So he basically believed that you have to establish facts on the ground by plowing the land. Chovah Migdal was the same thing in 36, 39, when after the Peel Commission, or while the Peel Commission was happening in 37, Ben-Gurion made a decision in order to establish enlarge the lines of the state of Israel, the future one. That's when they started putting strategic Jewish settlement, Chovah Migdal. I don't know how to translate it into English.
A wall and a tower.
A wall and a tower that was, they put about 80 or so between 36 and 39 while the big Arab revolt was happening, and the British supported them in order to show the Arabs it's going to cost you worse. So the Zionists took advantage of that thing. At that moment, Agapirim, the British actually trained some of the Jews to hold guns and be משטרת הנוטרים, the police of the, I forgot, I can't.
The agricultural police,
The
more or
government,
less.
whatever, yeah. So this all happened because Ben-Gurion and his cohorts understood that being like 5 or 10% of the population and being along a very small strip, unless they enlarge it, they're not going to get the state. So you just support what you said. And even if somebody read Benny Morris, the beginning of the Palestinian refugee issue, the first book he wrote about it. He was still an honest broker, an honest historian who read the documents. 10, 20 years later, he actually tried to mitigate the whole thing because he wanted to get into the grace of the Israeli government. So yes, it's anybody who wants to read it, it's there. They never actually were hiding it. It's always there. You can read. I mean, there's at least 150 or 200 books on the history of the Zionism from different directions that you can actually dwell. I spent a lot of my time reading in those, and I discovered a lot of things. Listen, Mapam had a huge problem. On one hand, they're members of the international, yet Avodah Ivrit, Hebrew labor. How do you reconcile this thing?
Okay, we have to move on because
Okay.
it's 8:40 already. And Gideon, you're next.
So Uri, thank you very much. Very, very educational. And I know I told you before, I was one of those people. Why do we talk about Zionism? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
You were
but
trained like everybody else.
yeah, I have to say I have a lot of problem with what you were talking about. I think you, in my mind, mixing the ideology of the Zionism with the political reality of what's happening in 48. Now I mean, Ben-Gurion had to deal with Mapam, and he had to deal with the religious. If I was Ben-Gurion, I was going to the religious people also, because you can buy them.
Dictator like him. They're a dictator like him, Gideon. That's good.
Yeah, I would not go and deal with Mapam, because Mapam, you know, who they are, where they are the parents of the hypocrite in the Israeli history. The second thing I want to say, and I touch on this, is it's the way in 48 when there was a discussion, do we need the Zionist movement, or is the Zionist movement was only the establishment of the state of Israel, or everything changed after the Holocaust, and now all of a sudden there is a lot more Jewish to be saved. And it's not surprise to me that most of the people said that, hey, we need to close the book on the Zionism, we're Ashkenazim. And I look at this a lot for me, as a person that doesn't define himself as Zionist, or I would say that I had a period of maybe 3 months when they announced Zionism and racism is the same, that made me very angry. But I never defined or saw myself. And I remember somebody once when I was a member of JVP, insulted me, or thought he insulted me when he's calling me Zionist. I was like, what the F? I don't care. But I think there is a lot of people that all of a sudden found themselves in Arab state or Muslim state. They felt that they have no place to go. They need to run away. Some of them, the lucky one, went to Canada, US, or Europe. The unlucky one went to Israel and created, you know, the second class or third class citizen of Israel. For me, and I'm like you, I grew, my political knowledge and my political leaning was completely influenced by Haolam Hazeh and Uri Avneri. But I became politically active only after the war, where I was a soldier and many of my friends died, and all of a sudden I realized it's not enough to believe in something, you need to be active and you need to work on it and you need to do something. So looking at the Zionist movement, I'm still in the position, I don't care, because it's not, for me personally, on the personal note, it's not a relevant movement. There is no, like Yossi said in the blue box, it's an old history, Yossi. Yosef Weitz wrote about it in his book, that he is like, he is known, by the way, as the father of the forest, of Melech HaYarot, or Abba Shel HaYarot, because he was Kakal, but he was also openly and unashamedly, he was still advocating for transfer from 48. He said, we need to do it. There is a lot of people in Jewish, in many places that are aware of it, but maybe shameful is not to admit it, but it's not I mean, what I didn't know, for example, I knew about the transfer and all this, I didn't know what they did in 48 was to kill and destroy houses and instigate these people. It was done. I always believed they ran away until I start reading and said, no, if you read, you see they did horrible things to cause them to run away. And as soon as they ran away, they destroyed the village. Those people has no place to go. So again, I'm saying there is a lot of stuff. I'm touching only of the stuff that's burned me. But again, I'm in the position, who cares? I mean, thank you.
Thank you, Gideon. One thing I want to say, when Moshe Dayan came to David Ben-Gurion in 48 and asked him about Lud and Ramle, what should we do with them? Two major Arab cities. Traditionally, the notion says he did this. He didn't give an order. He just waved his hand. In other words, who cares? Get rid of them. So there were a lot of people who were raised in the Palmach, who were Mapamniks. When they realized in 48, like Samech Izar, Chirbat Chizai, we all read that story and the whole thing that was part of the education of the Israeli high schools. But that was done 100 times over. By omission or by commission? That was the big argument. Did we kick them out, or did they run, or did we help them run, or did we force them to run, or did we scare them to run, or did they just left because they wanted to come back later, as the propaganda said, that the Arabs told them, get out and we'll conquer, we'll get it for free later on. They did a lot of research. They never found it because it was never said to them that way, at least not the way the Israeli propaganda said it was on all the radios and all that thing. But this is a conversation that doesn't lead anywhere, because one of the ways that I tell people, look at the facts of the ground. This is the proof in the pudding. You want to look at what the intention was? Look at the results. 99% of the time when you look at the results, you understand what the intention was. Very seldom you look at results and they were the opposite of the intention. So that's my argument, supporting what you said. I basically call myself a Zionist since 1968. I said, I'm not against, I'm not for, I'm basically the abolitionist. You free the slaves, close the deal, move on.
Yes, I am the don't care.
Tony, you had your hand up before. Do you have something you wanted to contribute?
Yeah, I find it very interesting that in this whole conversation, one of the few people to actually refer to Palestinians as Palestinians was Yossi. It is built into Jewish language to talk about Arabs, not Palestinians. From the beginning, there has been no recognition of them as a people, even though the concept of Palestine goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. And And anyone who reads the history of the word Palestine knows about that. But even today, I mean, we know how Uri feels about the whole thing, but he can still talk about how, you know, Arabs, rather than mentioning it's kind of built into the DNA of everybody who believes that Israel is right and the Palestinians are not worth anything at all. And it's very similar to what the United States did. They called everybody Indians rather than Sequoias or Dakota or Navajo. There's just no recognition whatsoever for the intrinsic value of those people. And I truly believe, too, upon reflection, I've been thinking about this for a long time, that the only thing that really kept, that I go back to Jabotinsky and his iron wall. He said, you want to take that land from them? They're going to fight it. You're going to have to build an iron wall. You're going to have to get the guns and everything else. You're going to ultimately have to kill them because they're not going to let you take over this land. And I truly believe that the one thing that has kept Israel from carrying on a more, shall we say, modest Holocaust has been the Holocaust itself.
So first of all, guilty of charge. I was brainwashed as well as anybody, even though for years I'm
No,
telling.
no, I'm not saying it's
No,
wrong.
no, it's okay.
Sorry,
What I'm saying, the
just trying to
distinction between
build up.
Arabs and Palestinians have been obfuscated by purpose by the state of Israel from the beginning.
Right.
Because they always say, what do you want? Arabs, you have 22 states, go. And people ask him, why should anybody from Iraq or from Syria or Saudi Arabia go to Morocco or Algeria or to Tunisia? They have nothing in common. They don't speak the same language even. They basically believe in supposedly the same Muslim, maybe. They don't even believe in the same exact religion. So, but for the Jews, it's like you say, all the blacks or all the Indians. It's very easy because if you do not have distinctions, you can dismiss the whole thing. I agree with you 100%. I catch myself a lot of times. I'm not saying Palestinian, I'm saying Arabs, but specifically, Israel is a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, and a lot of the Arab countries, for their reasons, a lot of them political reason, has nothing to do. If you ask most Arab countries, they hate the Palestinians. Most of them hate them because, for one thing, they're most educated in the Arab world, and the other thing, they're the troublemakers. Everywhere they go, there's a problem because they're too educated. They're instigators. They raise questions. They challenge the kingdoms and all that. So
the Jewish of the Arab world.
Exactly. Who wants the troublemaker? Yes, they're brethren when we deal with the Jews, but they're not brethren with us. They're troublemakers. Anyhow.
Okay. Elena, we welcome you. This is the first time I remember you here. We hope you come again. I was wondering if you had anything you wanted to contribute. Guess not. Okay, anyway, I have a couple of...
Eli, did you say you raised your hand? And
There's a couple of things I wanted to say. The word Zion is a biblical term, isn't it?
Yes.
And it refers to the that particular piece of land that we now call Palestine.
It refers to Jerusalem specifically. It's a name. It's another name of Jerusalem.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to say is you mentioned that Israel never defined its borders. The Montevideo Convention of 1933 lists 4 criteria that make a state. And one of those 4 criteria is a defined area, a defined territory. And at least by the Montevideo, the Montevideo Convention of 1933, Israel doesn't have the criteria of a state.
Ever since when the Jews listen to the Goyim and the Goyim tell them that's the way it is. The Jews say, no, for us it's not. We do it. We define the rules. Don't tell us.
Okay, well, it's getting on to 9 o'clock. Does anyone have any final thing they wanted to say?
Ask Leo if Leo wants to contribute. Leo, anything you want to say? Unmute, unmute. Unmute.
Okay, nothing much to add. I'm totally confused at this point.
Oh, okay, that's good. Confusion is good. I know you. You're gonna go read now. I know you. You're a reader. You're gonna pull 10 books and start reading about the subject. Terrific.
It's the preparatory stage to enlightenment.
Oh, Leo is enlightened. Leo is enlightened. Yeah, he knows so much. But now I forced you to go to the books, right? Terrific, Leo.
If it isn't chemistry, I'm not going to read it. You know that.
Okay, folks, the email with the links to the recordings and the video will come out by midnight. And Uri, if you have anything, I can put in there references. If you have some of those books you mentioned that.
Hold on a second. Let me see if I can
send them to me if you send them to me by email in the next 20 minutes, we'll put them on the email of the recording.
Send us the slides. Send us the slides.
Give me just a second. Let me see if I can do. I want to see if I can share the screen. Hold on. Let me see if I'm able to do that. That's when I was practicing, and I want to see that I can do that. No share. Where is it? Okay, it's in
Oh,
here.
yeah.
Share.
You shared it. There you go.
Okay, you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. This is when people tell me that there are not enough solution to the issue. This book was printed in 72. There's about 40 piece proposal before 73. It's an amazing thing. So in other words, I always tell people, you think the issue is we don't have solutions? No, the issue Israel is not interested in the solution. And here's just a couple of other books.
Oh, yeah.
This is a fabulous book. It was written about the settler. This is a book that most of you don't know about. In 1988, the son of Moshe Sharet, Yaakov Sharet, he wrote a book, and this is basically an obituary to the liberal democratic state of Israel, 1948. This guy, Boaz Zevon, most of you know, he wrote an amazing, thoughtful book in 1988 also. This is called The National Accounting. And he basically deals with a lot of issues from 48 to 88 about the Constitution, about the democracy, about a lot of issues he raises. This was a reference book for me. It was issued in 77 or so. This is another one. It's a political dictionary of Israel. I didn't have all of them. Oh, okay. There was one thing I wanted. Anyhow, I'll try to figure it out, Jeff, how to transfer it to you if I can. If not, I'll do it tomorrow or something.
That's amazing list. Thank you. Send it.
Oh, I have. I didn't even put all the books.
I know.
You see
Don't
the
overwhelm us.
No.
Okay, so I thank everyone for being here,
Thanks,
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
for
Thank you, Uri.
helping us understand. And we'll see you all in a month when we talk about Saudi Arabia as maybe a peacemaker.
Okay.
Good night,
Bye,
all.
everybody. Thank you, Uri.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Judy.
Take care, Jeff.